Hi and welcome. We are going to be doing a fun, really textured piece covered with art resin. And so you can see I'm starting off here. I love using just a cradled wood panel when I use art resin, and also when I use lots of texture. It gives a really nice rigid surface. So there's no bowing or cracking. I do recommend using an acrylic medium paste. If you want to learn more about creating that texture with the acrylic mediums, I do have a course called Touchable Texture, and I go through all the basics, the products I use, and lots of neat ways that you can create wonderful texture in your art. But I've started off here. I let that texture dry, put a coat of bright pink paint. Pink is my favorite color, and I am, for the purpose of this demo video, I went with a really simple design, which my art is fun and whimsical, and I do simplify my designs and make them lighthearted. So, this is my favorite place, which is the ocean, and I'm just going to start off with some blues and go in with the darker values. I do let the layers dry in between, and I'm going to go ahead and paint this first layer of paint on. Let that dry, and we will continue on with another layer. That's one thing I do, is just layer upon layer. I think that's the greatest compliment, when people want to reach out and touch my art. And then when you finish it off with the shiny art resin, it just really makes all that dimension pop. So I'll let you watch here as I put these layers of paint on, and we will come back here in a sec and go on to another layer of paint. Now here is where the fun part, it starts to get fun. You've got this raised texture, and so if you get a brush and you put the paint on pretty thick, you can kind of drag it across, and it picks up in certain areas, which really makes for some cool effects. And so you can see I started off with those darker values, and now I'm coming back with some lighter values and adding it on top, where you can still see those darker values peek through, so that adds for a really nice effect. And then another technique I love to do with texture is just some scratching. You can carve actually into the paint, exposing those underneath layers. And so I do that a lot in my art with writing different things. Like I said, this is just a really fun, whimsical, easy piece. And so I just wrote my happy place in it. And come back, I just did that with a pencil. The pencil doesn't show, but it does scratch, exposing that pink underneath. And so you do have to do this while your paint is still wet. It's hard to scratch in after the paint is actually dry. But anyway, getting those edges painted up, and then we're going to get ready for our next fun layer, which we're going to be using some papers. And I love to use, a lot of times I'll use handmade papers or just scrapbook papers, but do these extra additional collage elements into my piece. So I made sure that that layer was dry, and coming back again, you can see, I don't know how, sometimes I'll do 4 or 5 layers just of paint, because the more layers you add and you have the dimension in there of the different values underneath, the neater it looks. So coming back through, just dragging the paint colors throughout, putting a little highlights of the sun on there. And it's what's, like I said, fun about the texture, is that you can really just have fun using that raised texture to grab paint in different places. So I'll let you watch me finish this piece, and in the meantime, I am gathering up some pieces of paper and getting those ready with just some gel medium. Normally I'll use like some matte gel medium to put on. I tear those out ahead of time, just have my little scrap piles ready, and then I'm going to place those onto my piece. And you can do, since this is a smaller piece, I can't be as free with it. When it's a larger piece, you can really have fun with big chunks of paper by getting those on there. I usually kind of tap the paint around it to cover up the edges, but the cool thing is when you add the art resin on, it makes it all come together and you can't really see where the paper starts and the paint begins. It kind of makes it all blend together and appear as one. So I'll let you watch this process, and we'll come back and finish this up. Well, as I always say, no piece is ever complete without a little confetti and glitter. So here I'm just using some glitter glue, and I had some little hole punch confetti, and adding those kind of as my last layer of embellishment. And then we're going to add our resin. All right, let's talk about using resin. So I am going to be using the art resin, which I love. You have to mix it in 2 parts. So I would really recommend, they have great training materials on their website. It comes with when you purchase it, it comes with this. It even has a calculator, so it will tell you like for how many inches you're doing. It will tell you how much you need to mix up. So refer to them for all these details. I'm going to be sharing some best practices that I use when doing my resin pours. So first of all is I've got my art piece here, and it's really important that you make sure your piece is good and dry. Because I use so much texture in mine, I've let mine dry for over 48 hours. You want to make sure that all the layers, there's nothing still wet under there. Give it time to cure, and so there's no movement or cracking once you get the resin on top. So make sure your piece is dry. Another important factor is you may want to consider, I work in a garage studio most of the time, but I usually come inside for my resin pours because it's really important that you are in a climate controlled environment for the pouring process and also for the drying process. So because I live in the South and it's really humid, sometimes it's not the best place out in my garage to do a pour, and I just don't know what the weather's going to be from one day to the next or even overnight. So I come inside in the climate controlled environment. And then the last thing that I've kind of learned is doing your art on a rigid surface for resin, you're going to get the best results. You can definitely use a canvas. If you use a canvas, you may want to put like a cardboard piece underneath the canvas in the frame so that it won't warp or bubble. But this just allows for a more even surface, and I don't know, I've just had better results with using like a cradled wood panel, or even like a canvas panel that has a board underneath, just to where you don't have any flex in there. So some of the supplies that I use, I wanted to kind of cover how I do it and how my setup is. So I have a big space covered with cardboard here. You can see, because whatever you use, you want to be sure and cover your workspace and be able to throw it away, because it will get messy and it's hard to clean up. I used a double cardboard system. I have a cardboard big piece underneath, and then I usually have a smaller piece that my art will fit on. And this is where I do my pour, and then I can pick this up and move it out of the way. And so if I'm doing multiple pieces, I'll have a piece of cardboard for each piece of art. And that just helps me move things around. You don't have resin sticky on the bottom that's getting on everything, so that's helpful. Another thing I do use is I always have some little cups. You want them to be really sturdy so that you can place them underneath your piece of art. And you may want to put 2 so it won't tip. So it's pretty sturdy on there. And that way, if any of the resin drips off, it won't glue itself while drying to your surface, because that does happen. If it's sitting flat on a surface and it dries with that resin on it, it's really hard to get off, because resin's really thick and permanent once it's dried. So I always use little cups to sit underneath my art, and that way I can move this really easily like that. So okay, the next thing I've discovered, you always want gloves, so cover your hands. And then all of my mixing utensils that I use, I do disposable, just because it's easier just to throw it away than try to clean it up. So and like I said, the Art Resin website, they have a chart where they'll tell you how many ounces you need to cover a certain square inch on your art, so refer to that. But usually when I mix up however many ounces I need, I'll just mark a little. I've got a Sharpie. These are just the little Dixie cups, and I just made a little mark in here. So I'll fill up, this in there to that mark. I'll pour it in here, scrape it all out, and then I'll pour this in and do that. And that way I know I have equal parts, and then I can mix in this bigger cup so it doesn't spill out. And then I'll use this for my pour, and then I can just throw all of this away. And I keep a little plastic bag and a paper towel. Make sure you have some paper towels. I keep a little plastic bag on hand so that I can put everything in here, because I've learned how messy and sticky it is. I also keep these paper towels here, so even like when you sit a cup down, if it's dripped and it's got resin dripping down it, you want to make sure you sit it on a paper towel, because it drips and gets on everything. So it's really, really drippy, but it gives us really, really pretty results. Then the last couple of things that I use, you will need a heating element. So I use a heat gun. You want to make sure you could use a hairdryer on a low setting. You do have to be careful though that you don't keep it in one spot for too long, because it'll move your resin around. So you're constantly moving your heat gun, or you could use the little blowtorch thing if you're skilled with that. I use this because I don't want to harm myself. And like I said, a hairdryer can work too on a low setting. And then the last thing that I always have on hand is a Rubbermaid tote. If you're doing a large piece, you could use, I've used a laundry basket before. The only thing is that things can get in the laundry basket. So I try to use like a Rubbermaid tote, something that can totally cover my piece of art for it to dry. And that way, I'm in a house, I have a cat that crawls on things, and there's dust and there's bugs in my garage. And so you want to make sure that you give your piece the best opportunity to dry without any dust particles or anything like that in it, so you'll have a really smooth, glassy finish. So those are my tips, and we will continue with our pour. All right, we are going to get started here with our resin. Normally when I do resin, I'll mix up a lot, and I kind of save up my pieces and do them all at once. But since today we're just doing one, I'm using this small Dixie cup, and I'm gonna just pour this in. I had made, like I said, a little mark with a Sharpie inside the cup, so I kind of know how much I'm using. So because I want to make sure we have equal parts. And then it's really important to clean up this mess. That's why I said have some paper towels that you can, in your little plastic bag, that you can dispose of things. You'll find that it's really sticky and gooey, and so try to keep your surfaces clean. And once you have your resin stirred up, I think you have about 45 minutes of working time. Like I said, they have a great website with training materials. They have a nice little instruction booklet that comes with the product when you get it. And the reason I started using art resin, I use it because I love it, not because I'm paid to use it. But I had done a resin pour before, and I used another resin, and remember which one you use. See, I almost forgot. So I used the white one first, so I'm going to use the black one next. But and see, it's hard for me to talk and like do this at the same time. I'm not real good at multitasking when I'm doing stuff like this. I got to think, make sure I'm watching what I'm doing. But the reason I had done a resin pour with a piece of art, just a regular art resin, and it turned yellow and it ruined my piece of art, and I was so upset. And plus, regular resin is really toxic and smells bad, and you have to make sure you're in a really good ventilated area. I can do this in my house. There is some odor, but it's non-toxic and the odor is not overwhelming. So as long as you're in an open space, you're just fine. And so I came across art resin. One of my friends did resin and she recommended it. And I was sold right away because it's really easy to use. So I'm going to stir this for 3 minutes. So I've got to kind of watch the clock, and I'll speed this up so you don't have to sit with me for 3 minutes. But, you know, it is non-yellowing, it's non-toxic, and it's low odor. And so, and it's really simple to mix up and use. And that's what I've used ever since. So, anyway, we will get this stirred here. I'm going to put this on fast motion and we will do our pour. Okay, so you'll notice that it gets kind of milky looking. Those are all the bubbles. It's activating the resin. And so make sure you do it, start for the full 3 minutes. So I'm going to get my piece of art here. I'm going to prop it up on my little cups. Make sure that it's sturdy there. And I'm just going to start in the middle and pour. You can get it as thick as you want. I want to make sure, because I do have this texture in here, I want to make sure it has time to settle down in those crevices. And that there's enough resin to do that. And it's going to be hard to tell like right up front. But ooh, when this is dried, it's going to be so, so pretty, because it's going to give it a nice glassy finish and really make all the color, it'll make the texture just more dimensional, and everything's going to just pop. So I'm making sure that I am spreading this. If it kind of starts running down the side, that's okay. I'm using my tongue depressor thing here to make sure it's getting leveled. It is self-leveling, so it will kind of level, but when you have a piece that has a lot of texture, like I said, you've got to make sure that it gets down in those cracks. You don't want anything left. And so I always kind of look from the side. If you get from the side, you can see the areas that you've missed. And make sure that you got everything covered and as even as you can get it. But if you have a piece that doesn't have as much texture, you can usually just like kind of drag this across and it will level it really nicely for you. Okay, I think that is covered nicely. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that in there. I'm going to use my finger, and I'm just going to, this is the really messy part. I'm just going to rub the edge here and kind of coat my edges with resin so they also have a shiny finish. And then that also just smooths out those drips so that there's not big drips going down the side, which some people leave the drips, and you know, that's not a bad look either. It's just, if you were wanting to frame and there's big drips and they're sticking out, it could, you know, keep you from being able to put some sort of like float frame around it. So I always just like to kind of smooth that out and cover it with some red, like your leftover resin here, and just kind of get it nice and shiny too. Ooh, that's looking really pretty. Okay, and so I think I've got it. Good coverage. Got all the drips off the side, it looks like. So now I'm going to remove my gloves, put them in my bag, along with this cup. And I'll use my heating element, and we're going to dry until we get all the bubbles out. Now with the heating element, like I said, don't get it too close, and don't keep it in one space for long, but you'll see the little bubbles start to pop as the heat hits it. Okay, and you can see it went from milky to really nice and clear. So that did, there were some drips, more drips that came off the side. So maybe I should have probably had another stick where I could like kind of wipe my drips, but and spread those out so they're not noticeable. But like I've said, I've seen some resin artists that all they do is resin and they just leave their drips down the side, and I think that's maybe just kind of part of the character of it, but I usually kind of try to blend mine. Especially if it's a piece like this, it's probably going to be like a shelf sitter, where this will sit up and stand alone, so I want the sides to look nice. All right, so now my piece is ready to dry. I'm going to do one last check from the side and make sure. Looks like I usually go from all sides and just make sure there's no uncovered spots, because you'll be surprised, like if you don't do the side test, I always call it the side test, you'll forget a spot, you won't see it, and then you'll have a big open circle left. So anyway, I can't wait to show you this when it's fully dry. I'm going to put it under my tote and sit it to dry, and we'll be back to wrap up. Thank you again so much for being here. And as always, if you like this video, it would mean a lot to me if you would subscribe to my page and leave a comment. If you'd like to learn more about using art texture in your own art, Check out the comments and I'll put a link to my Touchable Textures course. See you in the studio soon.